Ah yes, we're here. The X3, otherwise known as the Xecuter 3. I've been asked to take a look at this mod chip for several years for the original Xbox here on the main channel with countless different requests. Now, when many people think of the Xecuter 3, or the X3 for short, they think of a super awesome looking, decked out, modified original Xbox, which looks a little something like this. Well, we're not going to be taking a look at an Xbox like that, unfortunately, because we're going to be taking a look at the chip itself. Now, let's start from the basics for anybody who doesn't know anything about this topic. What is the X3? The X3, again, the Xecuter 3, is a mod chip for the original Xbox. Now, the way the original Xbox works, in short, in a simplified way, is that it has a on-board BIOS much like a PC. This BIOS is essentially the Xbox's core operating system before anything else is loaded in, such as, the actual OS which is installed to a hard drive, otherwise known as the dashboard. What a mod chip specifically does for the original Xbox is it allows you to flash a BIOS, a modified BIOS, or any BIOS that you pick which is compatible, onto the chip itself. You then connect the chip to the Xbox, and it essentially redirects the BIOS on boot. So when you turn on the system, as opposed to booting up the on-motherboard here, stock BIOS, which the Xbox comes with from the factory, it will boot up whatever BIOS you choose to have, which is installed on the chip itself, which is connected right onto the Xbox. In comes the X3 from Team-Xecuter, who by their words have been rocking the box since 2002. The Xecuter 3 was released in late 2004. From my research, it looks like it released somewhere in October or November of 2004, and was one of the final mod chips released for the original Xbox by Team-Xecuter. This was also later revised and then re-released, so to speak, or upgraded to the X3CE. The X3 was part of the fourth and final generation of original Xbox mod chips. Essentially, at this point of mod chip generations, all the main features that people had wanted and the extra features that were thrown in there were already available, so this was more just concentrated on how we can make things better, how can we make things even more customizable, and mainly focusing on other aspects such as adding in multiple different BIOS banks and just more memory and storage in general so people can choose between multiple different BIOS as opposed to being stuck with one or maybe two. The retail suggested price of the X3 was $55 USD. So it was actually more expensive, the most expensive chip on the market compared to its competition, some of which included the Xenium and Spider GX, which were $48 and $50 suggested retail prices for this. At the time, Team-Xecuter really had the name and the biggest share of the market, I would say, so they were able to justify charging the most for their chips. The Xecuter 3 was initially announced on December 5th, 2003, with Xecuter stating the following: "For some time, we've been thinking of what we could possibly add to an Xbox mod. As for most of you, it already does everything you need. Well, the answer was simple. The features to add would purely be from a fun and ease of use perspective. So that's exactly how we approached it." Now, this video is not designed to be a super comprehensive, detailed, deep dive into every single feature the X3 chip has or the BIOS. But here are a few notable reasons as to why people really chose the X3 or the X3CE as their go-to mod chip of choice. First of all is the brand. Team-Xecuter, the Team-Xecuter, the original Team-Xecuter for the original Xbox. Love them or hate them, I guess think of them as a name brand in the modding scene. When it comes to, clothing or whatever your other favorite thing is, just think of Team-Xecuter as the name brand variant of that. Multiple BIOS banks was another feature. You see, to the user, this has 8 different usable BIOS banks, with each BIOS bank being 256 kilobytes in size, totaling of course to 2 megabytes in size. That means someone can take anywhere from 2 different BIOS, which each one being 1 megabyte in size, all the way up to 8 different BIOS flashed on this chip if they really wanted to, by flashing one 256 kilobyte BIOS to each of the 8 BIOS banks. And that's not even talking about the backup one that's already on here. X3 Config Live was another big one. In short, think of this like an operating system for the chip itself. It has many robust features, such as being able to edit the flubber color, install additional storage with ease, activate an FTP server, and more. Now, right now, this video is being recorded and released in 2019, and for the original Xbox, none of those things sound all too robust or, cutting edge. But you have to remember here that this is all on the chip itself, before the actual operating system and before the dashboard is loaded up. All of this is on the chip. On top of that, to me, the most notable features here are networking and BIOS modification features, which you can control on the console and on a PC. And finally, with everything under the X3 umbrella, this also allows for ease of expandability. So you can install things such as the X3 LCD, the X3 IR, the X3 Pro Switch, and of course the X3 control panel. This thing had a lot of extra peripherals that you could have loaded up on your Xbox. Now with all that covered, let's take a closer look at the chip, shall we? Alright, so now we're here. Time for the install, right? For this, I wanted to see if I could attempt this doing a completely solderless install. So I end up getting a Zaptor 1.6, the Xecuter 3 of course, and a 1.6 Xbox, complete with crustiness, dust, and a sticking DVD drive. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing this with a completely solderless install. The reason being is that it's just not that reliable of a method. The reason why I did it is because I had the parts I wanted to try out on here, and on top of that, I wanted to see if I could really replicate a install done by someone back in 2006, 2007 who didn't know how to solder. I'll say this, while the Zaptor is a really awesome concept, this thing was completely annoying to fit in. It worked in the end, but it was extremely touchy and not at all reliable, and when installing this, it felt like sneezing too loud would have knocked one of these legs loose. All in all, in the end, it's a really cool concept, but solder your damn chips in. If you can't solder, find someone to do it for you. These adapters are a bit pricey as well, so it really isn't practical to get one unless you're wanting to get it as part of a collection or use it for something such as here in this video. Now, once I got everything set up, I had the legs in the holes they needed to go, I had proper connectivity as verified by seeing all of the flashing lights on the Zaptor. I found out I have a Xecuter 3 and not a Xecuter 3 CE. The Xecuter 3 CE actually has a specific 5-volt port, which I am missing on the Xecuter 3, meaning that I can install this with this type of setup in a older Xbox, but not in the 1.6. A little fun fact as well too, I've been told that these ones here, the original purple Xecuter 3 chips, had a much lower print run than the regular white chips, which would be the Xecuter 3 CE. So technically, the Xecuter 3 is more rare than the CE, but you're better off getting a CE if you have to get one. So this install was kind of a wash, unfortunately. What I did was I ended up removing everything from the 1.6 Xbox, and I was going to install a original Zaptor because guess what? I had one of those as well too, but at the time I could not find the install dock. In hindsight, I really should have used the Wayback Machine, as that's how I found it later, but it's a little too late now. And by the way, if you're interested in that, here it is. So the next thing I did was close this system up, grab another system which ended up being a 1.0 Xbox, and oh no, it had a leaking capacitor. Not even leaking, it leaked all over the place already. So if we're going to use this one for an extended period, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, in order to clean this, I cleaned it by removing the dust from there, as much as I could at least. Next up, I took out the clock capacitor, which I just did by easily moving the clock cap back and forth for a few minutes until it popped off the system. I then had to neutralize the area with some lemon juice and a old toothbrush, and then cleaned it as best as I could with Q-tips and 99% isopropyl alcohol. While I was here, I also spent some time removing the CPU and GPU heatsinks, taking off that old thermal paste, cleaning them up, and then placing some nice new thermal paste there. With the console finally all cleaned up, it's now time to modify the system. Now, as I said, since I did not have the install doc because I'm gonna admit I was a little too lazy to look for it, I decided to just get out my soldering iron and solder the thing into the system to also actually have something that would be reliable. First of all, I had to clear out the LPC bus. I then had to modify the pin header accordingly, install it, and then install the rest of the chip. Here's a quick note on the LPC. LPC stands for low pin count. The LPC debug port allows anyone with a bit of know-how to directly manipulate the console itself. This is how sensitive information was programmed or flashed to the console at the factory. These are quite common to see working with pin headers installed on development consoles. My educated guess here would be these were kept in on retail systems in case they ever had to be repaired and reprogrammed with ease, because they're even right there, not this exact same one, but there are similar ports on all revisions of the Xbox 360. Now, unfortunately for Microsoft, the modding community latched onto this with ease. You could either install your own pin header or directly wire in your mod chip to the LPC port. Remember earlier when I said that a mod chip allows you to run a custom BIOS on the console? Yeah, that's how this was done. In the final revision of the console, the 1.6 variant, Microsoft actually disabled this port completely, but did not remove it. This is why you saw on the previous console these holes didn't need to be cleared out. Thankfully, if you're decent with a soldering iron or use a Zaptor 1.6, you can actually rebuild the LPC. This then allows you to connect a mod chip to a 1.6 console and therefore hard mod it and use a custom BIOS. With all that put in, I next had to take these spare wires and wire them up to the D0, LAN, and hard drive points, and route them from the bottom of the console to the top of the console. Next up was the eject board. This was pretty simple to do and kind of just goes in as a intermediary piece between your console's motherboard and the eject button functionality. Next up was the X3 control switch. This was pretty simple. I really just had to take the wires, put them into the fifth hole from the left on the Xbox's front panel, and route them outside of the system. Trying it all out showed that everything worked here on the first go. Awesome. It was super exciting seeing the X3 config live screen on one of my own consoles for the first time. So the next thing I did was install a 250GB hard drive, and I initialized it using Hexen 2017. The next thing I did was look at the BIOS. Now, if you ended up buying this brand new, it would not have had any BIOS installed on it except for Flash BIOS, which is a BIOS designed exclusively for flashing BIOS banks onto the mod chip. This one comes with Flash BIOS 3.0.0, and there was really no need for me to use it as it came pre-flashed with a couple different BIOS. The first one was the X3 BIOS version 3294, which was released on June 1st, 2005. This is also the final BIOS to be released for the X3, and that was flashed onto banks 1 through 4, being 1 MB in size. The second BIOS, which is flashed on banks 5 through 8, again being 1 megabyte in size, is the X3 BIOS build 1957, released on October 25th, 2004. I'm not really sure why this specific build was on there, but it was on there. Now, at this point, the console itself works like any other hard-modded retail original Xbox, but the cool stuff you can't access anywhere else is on boot, which is the X3 config live menu. So how about this? Let's do a video walkthrough of the X3 config live menu. Now this right here is the biggest reason why somebody would want a X3, and this really lives up to what was said earlier. The features to add would purely be from a fun and ease of use perspective. Alright, so firing up the Xbox here, what I have is the latest revision of the X3 BIOS running. So as you can see, we had the different animation here. All that is controlled within the BIOS itself, and here is X3 config live. As you can see, that is build 3294 running. So for this, we can kind of just go through the settings here and get a general overview. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to show you all the full animations and such, just due to my capture card cutting off, but I will have some externally recorded footage of that. So going off of this in X3 config live, we can customize the BIOS, and just a few of the options here. So auto starting this, of course, if you want that, the in-game reset, which is holding select, start, or back start, and both triggers at the same time. Debug BIOS, so as opposed to flashing the debug BIOS and such over, you can just hit A, enable it from here. Xbox Live login disable, that was of course relevant when the original Xbox Live was up and running, but unfortunately that's down. No reset on eject, so one nice thing is you're able to just press the eject button on modified systems and pop out a disk without it going back to your dashboard. You can disable that if you want to here. LBA48, that is a setting for bigger hard drives, just allowing different types of partitioning and allocations and such on the Xbox, so LBA48 is absolutely what you're wanting on there. Kind of a neat little hack to look into sometime. The dashboard boot priority, if you have multiple different dashboards, you can select which one you want. You can also rename all of these as well too. If you have a dashboard on another drive, you can pick where you want to boot the primary one from, and check clock for errors seems pretty self-explanatory, and that is enabled on default. For customizing the Xbox logo colors, from here, this is where you're able to tweak everything to your heart's content. And I have a feeling most people who were sitting in X3 config live were probably messing around with this and just seeing all the crazy stuff they can do. Unfortunately, the big Executor logo in the background, I don't think you can modify that at all, unfortunately, but you're able to at least modify the BIOS boot sequence. Now, if you're not super creative, they also, I mean, there's all these options here, but they also have the display color presets, which you can change, and if you're not wanting anything crazy, you can of course just reset colors to original. I myself personally am not crazy about the blue background on the boot up here, but I did it just to show you all that it can be changed. You can also customize the flubber colors, of course. One thing I always thought was cool was, actually I should have done the blue Bahamas, there we go. I always thought for some reason just the blue flubber was awesome when I saw those in videos, so you can change all that there of course. There's a few other startup tweaks, so you can disable the Xbox startup animation completely. The random flubber animation, I believe that only really works if you're completely powering the system down, turning it back on. I didn't have any luck with it when I was just resetting it from here. You can change the flubber animation. There is up to 15 different animations that they put on here, and by that, that's a little bit misleading. It's not actually the flubber animation itself, it's really the boot up animation overall. The flubber itself is random, but the angles and such as where the camera comes on boot, that's where that's different. You can make it be wireframed, which is cool for a few boots, and then I just disabled it. And LED color, of course, as opposed to changing it from the dashboard, you can change it right here in the BIOS. For display trademark logos, I guess it's kind of self-explanatory. I ended up, I disabled it here, and I didn't notice too much of a difference. And then DVD boot XBE name, if you want it to boot up a random XBE on a DVD you have, you can, in the drive when it's booted up, you can change that there too. For the X3 config live skins, I put a few extra ones on here, and unfortunately, the fonts just don't work on these, so I mean, they just don't look the best, and in my opinion, I really don't like how these look all too much, so I'm just going to go with the default skin on here. I'm not crazy about how X3 config live looks, but I mean, hey, it's cool at the same time. You can do quick launch here as well, so on startup, hold trigger for quick launch. Now, I don't know which trigger it would be, presumably just one of the triggers here, and you can pick which one you're wanting to on that. You can also reset the X3 config to defaults and reboot with this completely disabled. Now, taking a look here, let's look at the BIOS tools, where here you can flash a ROM, which you might have from here, depending on where it's at. That's actually pretty cool. You can load the BIOS from a DVD as well. You can flash a backup ROM, which the backup ROM is Flash BIOS. That is actually what comes just by default on the X3 if you have it brand new, and then you have to flash the other BIOS yourself. BIOS bank select, so you can pick what you want to on there. Press black for X3 dip setting. Oh, I can't actually do anything there. Unfortunately, I'm pressing black and nothing's showing up. One thing I think is cool is, check this out, I'm going to switch the banks up a little bit. I just did a few settings there, but if you pay attention to the top right corner, if you change the banks, it doesn't crash this here, but it does allow, like, it dynamically updates on there, which I thought was a pretty cool feature. BIOS bank naming. Now, I named these by default, so the way you name this is you have to press A on one of these, you have to select your BIOS size, and then you name it what you want to. And I named this one X33294 because that's what's in my BIOS banks 1 through 4, and then it just adds on the 1 through 4 to 2x4, 3x4, it just adds those on, so that's how it does that. For disk tools, this, a few people on Reddit, when I had asked about the X3 just benefits and such, had actually mentioned here that this was really beneficial, just an easy way to kind of set up and build and partition a hard drive here if you want to. So you can almost use a X3 enabled Xbox as kind of a workbench for hard drives, which is cool. But my hard drive, unfortunately, even though it says it supports locking, it doesn't. So if I try and lock it here, I press A, it kind of freezes for a little bit. I can hear everything recycling there, and it's just disabled, unfortunately. So the downside with that is if I boot up this Xbox with the Modchip disabled, it just ends up giving me an error, unfortunately. But that's fine, I don't really have a reason to boot it up without the Modchip enabled on there. You can also set up all your options and such here if you want to. So the way I'm doing this is, let's see, F gets everything, no G drive. F goes up to here. I just have it set as F gets everything, no G drive. And then you can prepare and format a new hard drive, which that's what I'd mentioned there before. So you can go back for your EEPROM tools. This is just saving your EEPROM, or showing the EEPROM info, saving it to the X3, restoring it from the X3, which is cool. And of course, as it shows there, you can FTP to your chip directly here, which I'll show you all in a little bit. Finally, with the settings, you got your network settings, region, video modes, LCD settings. I don't have an LCD on here, so I mean, I can enable this, but it's not going to do anything. Fan speed, which you can crank that up or down. It's just at default 20. Set the date and time, and password protect this if you really want to. I'm not going to do that. And let's look at the hardware info. That's my X3 info right there. Looking at the Xbox info, that's where it's installed. Hard drive info, that's of course the lying hard drive I have, which says it supports locking, but it actually doesn't lock. There's all my partition tables that are set up on this current drive. The DVD-ROM info, I'm using one of these janky Thompsons, but it works. Xbox Live settings, I mean, this is, it's pretty useless now, because you can't get online on Xbox Live at least. Here's the encryption keys, so that's cool, at least there's an online key, at least there's some lineage of that, and some stuff like that, and then you can even create a X3 data text file if you want to, which I'll go ahead and do that, and it flashed it over. So one thing as well too, which I found interesting, was I found a post about this on the Legacy Team-Xecuter site. Apparently, just kind of a side tangent here, at one point it was determined that people were getting their Xboxes banned when they went online after they upgraded the hard drive, and it was determined that the first time you ever went online, Microsoft essentially took a snapshot of your system, or a fingerprint, so to speak. So if you logged in one day with a 10 gigabyte hard drive and you logged in the next day with a 500 gig hard drive, they would know that you modified your system and they could just ban it right there. So what Team-Xecuter actually recommended was saying, hey, before you ever take your Xbox online, you need to do the hard drive upgrade offline first. So upgrade it to your 500 gig hard drive, whatever you want on there, and then take it online for the first time. So the first time Microsoft ends up getting that snapshot online, it's then able to, like, you'll be safe, I guess safe in quotes, so to speak. I know Microsoft was always going after these modded Xboxes, understandably so, and there really wasn't a way to unban them, but I just thought that was a cool little side story there. The last settings here are, of course, rebooting to your dashboard, which will just launch my default Unleash X, a cold reboot, and a power off. I do want to show you all this, how it looks through a FTP site though, so I'll do that real quick. So mainly look to the right here, this is everything. So when you remote in, you just use the IP and everything that is shown on the Xbox itself, except instead of Xbox for the username password, it is X3 and X3 for the username password. So here in admin, for example, you can go into BIOS banks and you can end up uploading what you want here. So you just pick that and you say upload to flash by drag and dropping whatever BIOS you want to flash in here, and that's pretty cool. So like 256K, you pick, let's say I want to flash bank 2, and you just put the BIOS in there and you're able to flash that way, which I thought was really awesome. The EEPROM, you're able to just siphon your EEPROM directly from there. And here on the C drive, that's of course just, I mean, nothing special. You can access this regularly. So that's my C drive. The D drive, of course, the disk drive, nothing in there. E and F are, of course, still the hard drive, and then X, Y, and Z are my cache. But the admin is really cool, just how you're able to access the EEPROM and flash your BIOS banks here on the fly through FTP. So you have to be quick about this one, but if you hold down both eject and power at the same time when booting up your system, your X3 will briefly turn purple and you're able to boot into Flash BIOS, which is by default flashed onto the backup bank of your system. This is a BIOS which is exclusively for loading up and flashing other BIOS onto a mod chip, as well as locking and unlocking your hard drive. So those are two options I have. I can load BIOS from a disk if I pop one in. I'm not going to do that. Can't really exit out of there. But I could also enable network mode on there, which I haven't figured that out. I'm not sure how to access this on the network. I can't do it through the web server that's running, since that's on X3 Config Live. And FTP doesn't seem to work either. So most people are going to do it either from a disk, like from Hexen or something, or using X3 Config Live. People really aren't going to be using Flash BIOS now at this point, but it's still cool to have just as, you know, a legacy, so to speak. One final feature I want to showcase for you all in X3 Config Live is the Xecuter Web Flash. This is a HTTP web server which is loaded up and running right now on the chip itself. If you boot up into X3 Config Live and hook up your Xbox to your network, just take the IP that it's attached to, plug it right here into your web browser, and you come to Xecuter Web Flash. From here you can choose a file on your desktop where it's just a BIOS file you pick and upload it onto the chip itself. So that's another way that you could flash on there. I just thought that was a really cool feature. So that's about it for the walkthrough of X3 Config Live. Now, time for my final thoughts on this. First of all, this is not specifically this one I'm holding, but this representatively here is the first Xecuter 3 chip I've ever seen, touched, or installed. I do want to mention that I'm coming at this from a fresh perspective with no nostalgia glasses on, because I didn't have any friends who installed Xecuter 3 chips, at least when I was using the Xbox back in the day. I didn't own a Xecuter 3 enabled Xbox until now, and I didn't mess around with any of this until now either, so this is all new to me at this point. Now, what do I think of this? Well, first of all, the installation was an absolute breeze. If you're familiar with soldering and you've done Modchip installs before, my goodness, this was one of the easiest Modchips installs I had ever done. I was truly surprised with that, so big props to the people who had worked on developing this chip. Mainly Team-Xecuter here, of course. Secondly, all the customized parts such as the eject board, the extra wires that came with this, anything else that I messed with during the install felt really sturdy, they felt of high quality, and I wasn't afraid of breaking anything. Everything felt great on this. Love or hate Team-Xecuter, they really went all out when it came to quality on this chip here at least. And finally, this is more a observation here and kind of my commentary on it. I talked with friends who have installed chips like this back in the day, and a few of them have complained about when they were setting these up, it was a really tight fit, fitting everything from the chip and getting it underneath the actual Xbox front panel itself and hooking it up here. As you can see, I have a good amount of slack right there. I can even choose to have more. I chose not to, but everything was a breeze on that. I had absolutely no issue with dealing with any kind of slack in terms of setting this up. On top of that as well too, I guess some people also complained about getting it through the hole here. I didn't have any issues with that. Both of these little cable setups went through just fine. That's my own personal thought on there while installing this. I personally did not have any issues with it. Now, I've been talking quite favorably about this chip the entire time here for the most part, and you all might be asking, is this worth the price? Absolutely not. That might surprise some people, but I'm going to go on record and say right now, absolutely not. First of all, this chip here sells for over $100 most of the time on eBay secondhand, when it used to sell for around $60 brand new. A lot of people also try and say that the Xecuter 3 is rare. Trust me, it's not, and do not let anyone trick you into thinking the Xecuter 3 is a rare chip. Yes, this one I'm holding might be a little harder to find than the X3 CE, but plenty of these things were sold. When I say X3, I'm including the X3 and the X3 CE here. Plenty of them were sold, plenty of them are out there. They are not rare. Don't let anyone fool you into thinking that. With so many of these things being sold, you have to ask, why are these so expensive? Well, first of all, the simple answer is they're no longer in production. They're not rare, but they're no longer being made. And because they're no longer being made, I'm sure a lot of the shops, the mod shops back in the day that used to sell these things are now defunct. They've gone belly up. They just closed down their businesses. So the businesses are completely different. The ones that are still around certainly don't have any X3s in stock unless they can find one behind an old desktop somewhere in storage, or maybe they have a case of them somewhere. Who knows? But the thing is, mod shops cannot readily order them anymore, and they have been out of production for a long time. Now, thinking back almost 15 years ago, it would have been super easy to get a hold of one. Team-Xecuter is manufacturing them, they were selling them to distributors, distributors were happily selling them to customers. But that's no longer the case anymore, simply because they're no longer being manufactured. Secondly, this thing was also never cloned. Unlike other mod chips such as the Modbo, which itself is a clone for the PS2 of the Matrix Infinity, or the Aladdin, which you can easily get online now, but I really doubt the Aladdin mod chips that are circulating now brand new are the same ones which are from the exact same company and distributors and everything that originally made them. So there's just no clones out there, unfortunately. People also want this chip. Remember, this is Team-Xecuter, the Team-Xecuter, the original Team-Xecuter for the original Xbox. That name is nostalgic for so many people. X3 is nostalgic for so many people. So there's a lot of people out there that want this chip, but again, because really none of these original shops are selling them, because they can't get a hold of them, because they're no longer being made, that price goes up. Now, one thing you also have to remember is the audience that you're trying to pander to here, or I guess tap into. First of all, you're dealing with gamers who own a specific console. Inside of that, there's going to be a minority of people who own that console who modify the system. Inside of that group of modders are another minority of people who actually know what is in their system. And finally, inside of that minority. So we're talking about a very tiny sliver here are the people who have a system, who have modded it or have a modded system, who know what is actually inside the system and are actually willing to open up the system, completely remove the chip, and sell the modification used separately as opposed to just selling it overall or just keeping the system for giggles at that point. Now, the way I personally like to compare this and explain it to people is this is the same issue we had about 10 years ago or so with Final Fantasy VII. And what am I talking about? Why am I bringing up Final Fantasy VII when talking about the Xecuter 3 mod chip? Well, hear me out on here. Imagine you're wanting to get Final Fantasy VII. It's 2010, you've heard about this really awesome game that was on the original PlayStation that many people had. Final Fantasy VII is not a rare game on the PlayStation by any means. It went greatest hits, which means that within an allocated time frame, it sold over 1 million copies, and then Sony ended up pressing more copies that were discounted. So there's millions of copies of Final Fantasy VII out there in circulation. When it went to the greatest hits bin, it was selling for $30, $20 or $30. But around this time, there were people who wanted to get a hold of the game, who heard it was a really good game, and they wanted to play it, or they had played it before and never owned it, or they had the game and they sold it and wanted to play it again. So really it was first-time owners that had heard good things about it, or people who wanted to relive their nostalgia, so to speak. However, that was a lot more people as well too. So there were all these people who were wanting Final Fantasy VII, a game that had not been in production or been pressed in years and was for an older, unsupported console at that point in time. The price skyrocketed, just like with the X3. Again, something that is not being manufactured, that is not easy to find brand new in stores anymore, and there's so many copies of it out there, but people want it, and there's just no more trickling down brand new, so the price ends up going up, unfortunately. Now, the issue was, as well too, is that people couldn't really find the game used either. You see, a lot of people who owned the game knew it was a good game and wanted to keep it and wanted to probably play it later on. So there weren't that many people who were selling it. And the people who were selling it would sell it either mistakenly or they would sell it for the right price. And there were many people who were willing to pay the right price, to the point where Final Fantasy VII used at one point was selling for an average of $100. Well, guess what happened? A lot of the people who were trying to gun after Final Fantasy VII, you know, years and years after its popularity had died down, that might be a little controversial, but it was a new game is what I'm saying. The point is, years and years later, it ended up going up onto Sony's PlayStation Network store on the PS3 as a digital download title for $10. Most people had PS3s and wanted to play this game and just decided to pay the $10 to download it digitally. Because they weren't game collectors. Most people weren't game collectors. Most people didn't care about the physical item. They just wanted an easy way to play it for cheap. And they got it by downloading it onto their brand new system for $10. And because of that, within a year or two, the price on Final Fantasy VII dramatically came back down. Because then suddenly it was available again. So you can now get a used copy for something that is a lot less than $100. Now, all of that I just explained, that sounds pretty familiar to the X3 situation we're dealing with, right? That's because it's pretty much the same thing. I talked about Final Fantasy VII, explained all that, just drop in X3. The only difference is we really didn't get another way to get a hold of the X3. Now, there's many other competitor mod chips out there. One I'm thinking of is the Smart XX, for example, which on paper is just as good or even better than the X3. The problem is, these ones also just don't have as much nostalgia, they might not be as well known, the branding just wasn't there. Again, Smart XX, awesome, very capable competitor, but Team-Xecuter, hey, people really remember Team-Xecuter. But on top of that as well too, these other competitor mod chips are even harder to find out in the wild. And many of these competitor mod chips I'm talking about simply just don't have the same aesthetic and style as the X3. That sounds silly talking about the aesthetics of a chip, but you gotta remember, It all came down to branding, and not just Team-Xecuter branding. I'm talking about X3 branding. Remember, near the beginning of this video, when I said, if I talk about X3, most people are talking about a super decked out Xbox? That wasn't done on accident. That was all done on purpose. That was all marketing and image right there. When I say X3, most people think of a super decked out Xbox with a X3 Pro switch, a X3 LCD, a X3 control panel, a XR, a X3 IR, all of these other things as well. So Team-Xecuter really knew what they were doing in terms of marketing, in terms of putting out all those extra peripherals out there. So there is an actual image that people think of and immediately snap to when you say X3 or mention Team-Xecuter for the original Xbox. People aren't thinking of just some generic chip. They're thinking of a super decked out Xbox that has buttons and LEDs all over the place and USB ports and an LCD screen installed in it. Now my final current day verdict here. In 2019, is it worth searching high and low and paying the price for a Xecuter 3 mod chip? In my opinion, no. When it comes to functionality, this BIOS, the X3 BIOS, although many people talk so fondly about it, it really doesn't do anything that many of the other, that sets it apart from the other BIOS, is what I'm saying. For functionality, most BIOS are going to be pretty interchangeable and really will do about the same stuff. So if there's specific functions you're looking for and the X3 has them, either they've been put into another BIOS, or if not, you're probably a power user, which is a rarity for people who are hunting down or are wanting to modify their original Xbox. In my opinion, you're much better off getting an original Xbox, which is lower than a 1.6 revision, and TSOT flashing that. One little thing, if you can track down a 1.0 or 1.1 Xbox, they actually have a 1 megabyte TSOT flash, so you can install a bigger BIOS in there, which is absolutely quite nice to have. There's also other chip options out there. As I mentioned, the Aladdin is quite easy to get a hold of, and now there's even ways of modifying the Aladdin, or you can purchase a pre-modified one with XBlast OS on there, which has a ton of extra features. Mainly, you can load different BIOS on there, you can do a few other things, you can actually re-enable LCD support and kind of fit your own LCD screen. You can make it look just as good as the Xecuter 3 LCD screen mods, but this one is not so much plug and play. You have to do a lot of it yourself, so it's very DIY. Now, if you are a power user and you want to play around with a ton of different BIOS and you want to mess around with this, like as I said, you can have anywhere from 2 to 8 different BIOS flashed on here, then a chip like this, or one of the competitors which has multiple BIOS banks, such as the Smart XX, would absolutely be a great option for you. But I don't really recommend paying the eBay prices. And when I say eBay prices, I mean over $100 for a chip with the necessary stuff like, you know, the wiring and the X3 switch right here. The real edge over the competition which the X3 has is X3 Config Live, which I will say is pretty awesome. It's really cool messing around with that, but $100 cool? I'll leave that up to you. Maybe you think it is. Maybe you think that's worth it for $100. To me, I don't know, I'm gonna leave that up to you. Aside from that, really, the only reason, in my opinion, to pick up a X3 now is to say that you have an X3, so it's sort of a status symbol, I guess. Funny, I guess if that's how you're looking for it there. Or just for nostalgia's sake, if you had a X3 enabled Xbox from 12 years ago, let's say, and you end up selling it for 20 bucks and you're really wanting to relive that, it would be cool to get a hold of one. Now, I'm not completely discounting it. I keep kind of harping on the price here, and I will say, if you're in the wild and you find a Xecuter 3 chip for, you know, 20 bucks or $50 or a pretty fair price, or you find a already pre-modded Xbox with the X3 installed, like let's say you found this out in the wild somewhere for $70, I would absolutely say hop on that. I say $70 because I kind of count Xboxes, they're normally $30 to $50 depending on where you go. And remember, the Xecuter 3 launched at around $60 or so. So I think that's pretty fair. Hey, what's going on, everyone? It's me, Mr. Mario, and coming at you with, I guess, an inslate of some kind here. First of all, if you made it to the very end of the video, I want to absolutely say thank you. This video has been an absolute blast to make, and it's something I haven't done before. I mean, I've done so many other tutorials, kind of modding overviews, commentary, just there's a multitude of different videos that you can find on the channel here, which if you're new here, I hope you do check out. But something like this, where this is kind of a, I don't want to call it a documentary. I feel like that is way too overused in the YouTube sphere here and just with online content creation in general. But something where I actually did some research on it, ran it by people, kind of did a overall look at the history, the development of it, then did a, I guess, documented install on here and did so much more. I haven't done a video like this before. Like this is new. This style is new. So bear with me if it sucks. Sorry, but maybe I'll learn. Really, my goal for this video was I wanted to aim for that sweet spot in edutainment, and I also wanted this to appeal to old head modders, newer modders, and people who don't know anything about modding in general. So if you do choose to comment something about this video, let me know what camp you fit in at if you made it to the end here. That's how I'll know you made it to the end. Let me know if you're a old school modder, if you're kind of a newer modder who just didn't know about this, or if you don't know anything about modding. Now, I also ended up doing a decent amount of research on here, and admittedly, a lot of it I'm sure really didn't get into this video. But oh man, it's because I had so much fun just really using the Wayback Machine for looking up the old Xecuter.com site. Oh my goodness, I had so much fun doing that. Now, there's probably going to be pictures somewhere on screen while I'm talking here, and these are just pictures that I wanted to share with you all because I thought they were really cool. Like one I'm going to put in here, for example. Team-Xecuter ended up making full-size, multicolored, original GameCube. I guess there wasn't any other GameCube, but they made full-size DVD case GameCubes, like GameCube cases. I can't talk, but you all know what I'm talking about. They made these, and they sold them as well too. I didn't know about this. I seriously had no idea. And when they were doing all the testing, look at the colors. Do some of them look familiar and kind of look like the same colors as the special edition Xboxes? Well, it's because they were the same colors when they were doing the initial molds. I just thought that was so cool. If you know anybody or you are someone who has one of these, let me know, and let me know details of it. Like, I would love to know more about these things because I never saw them for sale, ever. I never saw them for sale. I want to also give some thank yous here. First of all, I'm really not trying to brown nose, but I do want to say thank you to Team-Xecuter for this chip. Now, I did not get this from them. This is nothing, like I had to pay for this is what I'm saying, but what I'm saying is thank you for making the X3 chip because I'm sure not only many people enjoyed using this chip and installing it, but this also, I mean, without this chip, this video would not have been made. So what else am I supposed to say? Another big thank you is to the people and the maintainers over at the Wayback Machine. The Wayback Machine was paramount for looking up some of the little nitty-gritty details that I needed, and it's provided me so many hours of fun, not just for this video, but for so many other websites that I've crawled to look at older versions. Like seriously, one thing I recommend you all do, take some of your favorite YouTube channels and put them into the Wayback Machine and see what you can find. It's really cool seeing those old layouts and seeing how some channels have grown so much. Finally, I also want to give a big thank you to one of my good friends on here, Modern Vintage Gamer. He's been a great person to bounce information off of, to verify a few things, and even, I mean, he was just someone who took a look at the outline. Like, I actually wrote up an outline for this video, and I was like, hey, I'm kind of coming into this as someone who did not live through this specific era of modding. Like, I wasn't present at the time like you were, so can you check this out? And he made a few adjustments as well too. So MVG, thank you so much for that. Everyone, just put some respect on MVG's name, alright? This man is an international treasure, and we need to protect him. Now, the last thing I want to know from you all as well too is let me know, honestly, let me know what you all thought of this video. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Did you want more videos like this? Because I actually last year planned to do a video like this, and I've planned to do videos on hardware such as this, not just the X3, but other pieces of modding hardware. So I've actually bought some other pieces of legacy hardware that I want to delve into and do a video like this. Would you all legitimately be interested in more videos like this? If not, I mean, you know, this might just be a one-off thing. But if so, let me know, and that would absolutely be encouraging to make more videos like this. I don't want to give any hints on what I plan to cover. I don't want to give any timelines. I don't want to give any ETAs, but just let it be known that videos in this style have been planned for a bit, and I really want to know the audience reaction on that as well too. I guess we're at the end of the video now, so really thank you all for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, a like would absolutely be appreciated. If you didn't like it, a dislike is fine as well too. And again, for me to find out if you made it to the end of the video, let me know. If you enjoy this style of video, let me know what type of modder you are, and use keyword lilydog in your comment. Just use the word lilydog and I'll know. That's my dog Lily. She just turned 4. So yeah. Anyways, this is Mr. Mario, signing off real this time. Later, everyone.